Somewhere right now, someone is scrolling through video after video of people getting hurt, not because they have to, not out of morbid curiosity they can't shake, but because some small part of it feels good. That sentence probably made you uncomfortable. Stick around because the science behind it is stranger and closer to home than you'd expect. For a long time, cruelty was explained away as a byproduct of something else. Anger, fear, desperation, a means to an end. But psychologist Erin Buckels wanted to test something more specific. What if for some people, hurting others wasn't a side effect of anything? What if it was the actual goal? In 2013, Buckels and her colleagues Daniel Jones and Delroy Paulhus ran a study that would become one of the most cited in personality psychology. Participants were given a simple, disturbing choice. They could kill bugs in a modified coffee grinder, listen to someone else's bugs get killed, clean a filthy toilet, or do nothing and simply leave. The bugs weren't actually harmed, but the participants didn't know that. What the researchers found was that a meaningful subset of people chose the bug-killing option and reported enjoying it, even when the other harmless option was sitting right there. They called this trait everyday sadism, not the extreme criminal version most people picture. A quieter, far more common version that shows up in ordinary people. In ordinary moments, most of whom will never come close to breaking a law. The bug grinder study wasn't a one-off curiosity either. Buckels and her team ran variations of it with different setups in different populations, and the pattern held. A consistent slice of otherwise ordinary participants chose harm when a harmless alternative was available, and rated the experience as satisfying afterward. That consistency is part of what made the finding so influential. It wasn't a fluke produced by one strange lab session. It looked like a stable trait, measurable the same way researchers measure any other personality dimension. So what is actually happening inside the mind when cruelty itself becomes the reward? Paulhus's broader research places sadism alongside three other traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, in what's now called the Dark Tetrad. What makes sadism distinct from the other three is intent. A narcissist wants admiration. A psychopath often causes harm without much feeling either way. A sadist wants the suffering itself. The distress of another person isn't collateral damage. It's the actual point. Here's where the research gets more uncomfortable. Buckels ran a follow-up study specifically on online trolling and found that sadism was, by a wide margin, the strongest predictor of who trolls and why. Not boredom, not misunderstanding, not a bad day. For a subset of the population, watching someone else's frustration unfold in real time online is its own reward, functioning almost identically to any other pleasurable experience the brain seeks out. That should be unsettling on its own. But the harder part of this research is what it says about the rest of us. Because everyday sadism, as Buckels and Paulhus measured it, isn't a light switch. It's a spectrum, and most people score somewhere above 0. That small flicker of satisfaction watching a rude person get publicly embarrassed. The quiet enjoyment of a fictional villain getting their comeuppance in a violent, drawn-out way. A flash of pleasure at someone else's minor misfortune. These aren't necessarily signs of hidden sadism in a clinical sense. But the research suggests the underlying mechanism, pleasure tied to another's suffering, isn't reserved for a rare and separate category of people. It's a dial most brains have, simply turned up higher in some than others. This is the counterintuitive part. You've probably been taught that enjoying someone else's pain is something only deeply broken people experience. The research complicates that story. Buckels' data suggests sadistic tendencies show only weak to moderate correlation with other measures of psychological dysfunction. Plenty of people who score noticeably on everyday sadism scales function completely normally in every other area of life. The trait isn't always a symptom of something else going wrong. Sometimes it's simply a trait. Think about the last time you felt that specific, slightly guilty spark of enjoyment watching someone get exactly what they deserved. Not justice exactly. Something closer to pleasure at the suffering itself. According to this research, that flicker isn't proof you're secretly cruel. It's evidence of a dial everyone carries, usually turned down low enough that it barely registers. What separates the people in Buckels' bug-crushing study who chose harm for its own sake isn't a different species of human. It's how high that same dial happens to be set, and how much room a person's life and choices give it to turn. Understanding this doesn't excuse cruelty, and it isn't meant to, but it replaces a comforting myth that people who enjoy hurting others are simply broken in a way you could never be, with something more precise and more useful. A trait that exists on a spectrum is a trait you can actually watch for, in others and in that small, uncomfortable flicker in yourself, somewhere right now, Someone is scrolling through video after video of people getting hurt, enjoying it more than they'd ever admit out loud. Now you know that isn't some rare alien impulse. It's a dial, and knowing where your own sits is the first honest step toward making sure it never turns any higher than it already is. If you want to keep understanding what's actually running underneath the surface, this is a good place to stay.